Welcome back. I was trying to get through. So we're talking about the JonBenét Ramsey case, and we're talking about some of the fiber evidence that exists in this case, and we're talking about some of the intruder scenarios versus the internal staging. And I'm trying to get to this reconstruction of the crime scene. We've looked at several things as it pertains. We've started from the top. I planned to just read through this and go, but I had so many questions, as we were working through it. So kind of a little forensic analysis report that I was kind of digging through the material and came up with some of these things that, I don't hear a lot of people talk about. And beaver hair was one of the things that I didn't hear a lot about that came up in the Wolf versus Ramsey case, where they talked about beaver hair being on the duct tape, and sort of this animal hair, this black animal hair that was on on the tape's adhesive, and this dark animal hair or whatever, not black, but this dark animal hair that was found on JonBenét's hands, right? So the beaver hair being embedded on the tape's adhesive, and the dark animal hairs being found on JonBenét's hands, saying they couldn't find either in the home, right? The duct tape itself is unsourced to the home. Um, and they talk about there's discrepancy with the paintbrush. Um, Unidentified male DNA found under JonBenét's fingerprints and in her undergarments. And then you have these fibers that were found in the ligature, and some of the fibers from the cord in JonBenét's bedroom, suggesting that this individual may have been in her, may have even tried to start the process in her bedroom and drop some of the touch DNA, or not touch DNA, but some of the materials, um, uh, fibers from the polypropylene rope that was used as a ligature. We go on to Patsy Ramsey's discussion of fur clothing and things of that nature, noting that Patsy is admitting to having a black mink coat, black mink muffler hat, and earmuffs. John is owning a reversible leather jacket with real fur lining, described as real low cut black shiny pile. He talked about having some faux leather, um, naga hide or something like that. They talked about some ski boots trimmed with what might have contained leopard fur, is what Patsy said that she owned. And Patsy recalled JonBenét had little black shoes decorated with leopard or whatever skin, and she had worn them the night before the murder and everything went down. And so we were kind of talking a little bit about we're talking a little bit about we kind of traveled into sort of the fibers from Patsy's red and black jacket that she was wearing the night of the Christmas party that found their way into the ligature that was around JonBenét's head region and in the paint tray, even though Patsy told us that she had never wore that jacket around her paint material, and for that stuff to end up in the paint material, knowing that in the interview she had told Linda Hoffman, take the painting stuff downstairs, because originally the painting stuff was in the butler's kitchen, I think until Monday, which was the 23rd. And the painting stuff was up in the butler's kitchen, but she told Linda Hoffman they were getting ready for parties and whatnot, and so she had Linda Hoffman there with her, and so that Monday, and so Linda obviously Linda was working Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and obviously Wednesday is going to be Christmas, so Linda's not going to be there, and then I think they said that Linda was going to work Friday and come pick up a check that she was asking Patsy for on Friday, while John and Patsy and the entire family were going to be out of town during that time. And so Linda on that Monday, the 23rd, had moved the painting stuff down to the basement at Patsy's request. And now we're wondering if you told Linda 2 days before to move all of the painting stuff down to the basement, that person who comes in with and she moved it in a very specific corner over by the wine cellar, just like, right in front of the boiler room. And so the person who's coming in, who is the criminal, who is external, and is the intruder and is an external actor, comes in and somehow finds a garment or has a garment similar to Patsy's, and sort of somehow goes in there and is messing with it and sprinkles that into the ligature, sprinkles it into the paint tray, and I think some of that ended up under on the adhesive side of the tape. And so obviously, as you can suspect, that Patsy was, not happy to hear that. She didn't believe that this could be pointing to her. And then likewise, John's coat, his black wool shirt, was found in JonBenét's undergarments. Right. Even though there was, and this is the crazy thing, even though the person, the intruder, we'll call it the intruder, tried to wipe her down to get rid of the evidence, some of the evidence that stayed behind was the black wool Israeli kind of material, right? Some of that stayed behind and was found sort of en masse in JonBenét's undergarments. So that means that the person who was operating in trying to clean her off, to make sure that they could get away with it, apparently, that person was wearing or had the black wool similar to John's with them in the process. Okay. And so that's kind of what we talked about. We talked about the cost of the fur and the characteristics of the different types of fur, and how the fur was $2,000 to $5,000, or depending, in some cases could be $4,000 to $7,000. In some cases, the hats could go for $700 to $800, and the trapper style hats could go for like $300 to $500, something like that. So we kind of talk about the scenarios in which it could be the intruder. We talk about the scenarios in which the contamination of the tape. How did these things get on the tape? Could have came from different places, a third-party transfer, whatever, pre-used. We went through all that and then started assessing the likelihood of whether or not this could be an intruder or like an intruder, an external source versus an internal source, which suggests that it's indicative of staging. And so kind of closing off this analysis is, a reconstruction of the crime scene. And so we kind of think of ourselves as a forensic crime scene analyst. And in doing so, one of the things that we try to do is we try to hypothesize sort of the following scenarios consistent with the evidence as much as we can understand, just with what is presented. So you have, number one, a pre-crime contact, where the perpetrator obtained or used black duct tape that already had beaver fur on its adhesive, or wore a garment made of beaver fur. This material could have been a coat or a hat or gloves. The hair transferred to the tape or directly to JonBenét's hands during like the sort of showdown. Number two, arrival and restraint. JonBenét was moved from her bed and taken downstairs. Fibers from the cord, the polypropylene cord, were found on her bed, indicating that the cord may have been in her bedroom before being used. And so the attacker is fashioning the garrote using part of a paintbrush from the basement. Some wood fragments were later found in JonBenét, suggesting some foul play. And the ligature and the tape were applied, and the attacker may have worn beaver and fur clothing, and JonBenét's hands may have picked up sort of the dark animal fibers. And three, the staging or secondary transfer. Depends on how you look at it, what vantage point that you might look at this through, suggests whether you call it staging or secondary transfer. If an intruder's scenario is accurate, if the intruder scenario is accurate, the perpetrator may have discarded or taken the tape roll and other materials when leaving, explaining why they were never found. However, if a family member staged the crime, they would have had to obtain black duct tape and a cord from elsewhere and might have inadvertently transferred fibers from their clothing onto these items, which would account for the red and black fibers and wool fibers found. Also, too, to add to that, it could just be the case that they already have these things. Right? Could be the case because I feel like I read somewhere that the cord was boat cord. And I know Patsy said, well, John wouldn't use basic white polypropylene cord. John would use sort of like the kind that, were American style, had the American colors. It's just, you have red, white, and blue on the cord. That's what Patsy said John would use. It wouldn't be plain white. It would be something else, right? But we know that you use that type of cord. So whatever cord it is, you're familiar with it, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that we don't necessarily, I guess we don't necessarily have to believe that all of the cord that John would buy had to be red, white, and blue, right? Yes, his boat, the theme of the boat was Miss America, and it was red, white, and blue, right? But, and let me find a picture of that. So I was looking for pictures of the Miss America, but I couldn't find any. So I think this is the only one that I could find a picture of that Patsy mentioned as the grand season. Let me see what she said about it. Because it comes from, I think it got mixed up, but in his memoir, The Death of Innocence, John Ramsey recounts, and I don't know if it was in the Death of Innocence. I think it was either The Death of Innocence or it was The Other Side of Suffering. But anyways, John Ramsey recounts a tense moment involving false alarm where Police Chief Halverson drove down to the local marina to find him, confirming that John did indeed own a sailboat named Miss America. He also goes on to talk about standing on the deck of the Miss America, actively getting the vessel ready to compete in a local Wednesday race. Across all of the provided police reports, interviews, and transcripts, I don't see anything about Miss USA. Yeah, Chief Haverson and I drove down to the marina, and sure enough, John was standing on his sailboat. So this is from Patsy's perspective. Miss America getting ready for the local Wednesday race. Looks like a false alarm, I said. Later that day, I walked down to the end of the street to visit one of our favorite ladies in Charlevoix, 84-year-old Evelyn Sager, who baked and sold the best pies I've ever seen or I've ever had, next to my dad's, of course. She did this to fund her weekly bingo night forays at the VFW. And Patsy goes on to talk about how she was bombarded by a news reporter who snuck up on her. And basically, I guess John was supposedly hurt himself. And she just confirmed that it wasn't true. But anyways, so the Miss America was John's, that he was working to get ready. Now, am I tripping? Or did John make it seem like he basically knew nothing about sailing? He made it seem like Fleet was the sail guy, was the sailor, this sailboat, expert. I asked that, I say that because we talk about Miss USA. Let me keep going. And so he goes on to talk about blah, 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 blah. Skips the good part. John details purchasing a 1962 Matthews cabin cruiser named 10 O'Clock. And he used it as a refuge, specifically describing its rich colors and materials being built of mahogany over oak, featuring teak decks highlighted by lots of varnished mahogany trim. Um, and this comes from the other side of suffering. He talks about memories and a refuge for Burke and me. I still had my boat, though, a Matthews cabin cruiser named 10 O'Clock. It was built in 1962 of mahogany over oak, teak decks, and lots of varnished mahogany trim. 10 O'Clock is small by today's standards, is small by today's boat standards, but it can sleep six if I open the sleeper sofa in the salon. With 300 square feet of living space, it has a small compact galley, heads off each of the two sleeping quarters, and a salon area with a couch, an ottoman, and two upholstered chairs. So that's two boats. That's two boats, John, for somebody who really doesn't do boats like that. And then said it is further story that John's one of his real loves was a new old looking boat named Grand Season, which is this one, which you probably spent months designing. That one comes from the other side of suffering as well. When John said, and this is John's book, he says, uh, John is always on the go, hither and yon. Access recently celebrated its 1 billion mark in sales, so he's pretty happy. He and his crew were underway in the Port Huron to Mackinac Island yacht race. Oh, he and his crew were, so he had a crew. He and his crew, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of reading through some of the other side of suffering. Yes. I can find that. So basically, what I was reading was this. Charlevoix had always been a magnet in the summertime, drawing people from downstate to the souvenir shirt shops that dotted the downtown area of our little town. John and I enjoyed wandering through the shops there and looking at the boats parked at the city marina. On the weekends, multitudes of people surged into shops, um, walked down the quaint streets, surged in to shop, walked down the quaint streets, and watched the big power boats and sailboats coming in off Lake Michigan. The Beaver Island ferry was docked in Charlevoix in the summertime, and in the summertime took hundreds of people back and forth to Beaver Island. The peace we saw it there in the first summer would frequently be interrupted directly or indirectly by, by the media on August 13th, Dennis Halverson, chief of police, came to our door and asked for John. He's not here, I said. He's down at the Irish Marina, I think. Are you sure? Yes. I talked to him a little while ago on his cell phone. The chief looked directly into my eyes and said softly, we have just been notified that he has hurt himself. I didn't quite understand what the chief was saying. He could see the questioning look in my eyes. So he explained further. The rumor is circulating. Several media people have called me saying that John has killed himself. I immediately dialed John's cell phone, but he didn't answer. If I had just talked to him, I would have, if I hadn't just talked to him, I would have really panicked. Chief Alverson and I drove down to the marina, and sure enough, John was standing. Here's what I was reading. Um, and sure enough, John was standing on a sailboat, Miss America, getting ready for the local Wednesday race. Looks like a false alarm, I said. Later that day, I walked down to the end of the street to visit one of our favorite ladies in Charlevoix, 84-year-old Evelyn Seeger, who baked and sold the best pies, blah, 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 blah. And so John says in '09, I traveled back to Michigan. Um, I've just sold our home in Charlevoix as the real estate market is in the midst of collapse. I have seller's remorse. after the house sold. Selling that house is one of those irreversible decisions. I had intended to keep it until Burke graduated from college so he could have a home or he could have a house to come home to. Later, when I had to sell it, I knew I had sold a source of memories and a refuge for Burke and me. I still had my boat, though, a Matthews cabin cruiser named 10 O'Clock. It was built in 1962 of mahogany over oak, teak decks, and lots of varnished mahogany trim. 10 O'Clock is small by today's boat standards, but it can sleep six if I open the sleeper sofa. This is In the Other Side of Suffering. This is John's book. Um, blah, 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 blah. Says, when I bought the boat, I was convinced that Patsy, Burke, and I could live on the boat during the summer. It would be like a floating condo. I figured that experiment lasted about 3 weeks. Patsy was a good sport through it all, but it was just too small. Now that I'm alone, it has plenty of room. I told a friend I had sold my house and was staying on my boat for the summer. He thought a minute and then laughed and said, "Hey, you're homeless." No, I said, "Just houseless." So apparently, he bought this boat prior to um, Patsy's death. So it was a place for Patsy, Burke, and him to live during the summer. And it was a floating condo. So at this point, JonBenét is out of the picture. And it's before 2006 because Patsy is still alive when he bought this. So it doesn't really give a time frame in which when he bought the boat. And this is what I was reading about the grand season. It says, and this is page 22, The Other Side of Suffering. It's years later now, and I've come to a place where small things are significant to me. For so many years of my life, it was the big things that counted: houses, cars, boats, planes. It's funny because you mentioned that boats are a big thing to you, as you seem to have suggested that only Fleet White got you into it. Patsy loved to host dinner parties. The more people, the merrier. In those high-flying days, I never dreamed that one day I would downsize to the point of selling most of the treasures we owned and that I would be calling a boat my home. I never dreamed, with a master's degree in many years as a successful businessman with 700 employees, that I'd wind up jobless. An ideal Christmas, that Christmas of 1996. I wandered around the home of our gracious friends in the wee hours in stocking feet, came across the cachet of Christmas cards on the mantel in their family room. Happy loving wishes from so many people. I spotted our Christmas letter, the one Patsy had composed early in December. She had labored at it, wondering what to leave out. So much good in our lives to report. My heart beat in my ears as I read. Dear friends and family, it's been another busy year at the Ramsey household. Can't believe it's almost over and time to start again. Melinda has graduated from the Medical College of Georgia and is working in pediatrics ICU at Keystone Hospital in Atlanta. John Andrew II is a sophomore at the University of Colorado. Burke is a busy fourth grader where he really shines in math and spelling. He played flag football this fall and is currently on a basketball binge. His little league team was number one. He's lost just about all of his baby teeth, so I'm sure we'll be seeing the orthodontist in 1997. JonBenét is enjoying her first year in real school. Kindergarten in the core knowledge program is fast paced and 5 full days a week. She has already been moved ahead to first grade math. She continues to enjoy participating in talent and modeling pageants. She was named America's Royal Tiny Miss last summer and is Colorado's Little Miss Christmas. Her teacher says she is so outgoing that she will never have trouble delivering an oral book report. Um, John is always on the go, traveling hither and yon. Access recently celebrated its $1 billion mark in sales, so he's pretty happy. He and his crew were underway in the Port Huron to Mackinac Island yacht race in July, but had to pull out midway due to lack of wind. Can you believe that? But his real love is the new old looking boat, Grand Season, which he spent months designing. So he has a crew. Seems like you don't need Fleet White to run the boat, do you? So, this is the grand season, as I understand it, that John is running. But even more so, is what I wanted to get to. If you look closely, you know we talked about Patsy saying that they didn't own white polypropylene rope for sailboats. John wouldn't buy those. He would buy the ones with the red and black, or the red and white. And just want to confirm that Patsy mentions that John had red and white polypropylene rope, but probably not white like they discussed. I just want to confirm when she said that, because things get real detailed and technical. And hmm, what I do know, I don't know who that is. I don't know them at all. And maybe I'll just save this image to downloads, and I'll open it up because I want to be able to see the full thing. I want you guys to be able to see. And I know it's a little bit, I know it's a little bit hard to see, but in her June 1998 police interview, Patsy Ramsey is presented with a photograph of a piece of rope found at the crime scene, which prompts a detailed discussion about the types of rope her husband John used for sailing. Tom Haney shows Patsy pictures of a rope that was discovered inside of a paper bag in the second floor guest bedroom, also known as John Andrews' room. Haney asks Patsy if she can think of any reason to have that kind of rope around the house, to which she replies that she had never seen rope ends secured in the manner shown in the photograph. Okay. In the same 1998 interview, Patsy provides distorted context by explaining that John did keep various boat ropes up at their Summer Lake house, Michigan, for his sailboat. She notes that when those sailing ropes were cut, the ends were usually torched or melted to keep them from fraying, which looked distinctly different from the evidence photos she was being shown. Haney specifically asks her if John's sailing ropes were colored the same as the rope in the picture. Patsy clarifies the colors by stating, well, some of them have like little blue flecks in them, or red, or there's some white ones, you know. I, I, I appreciate you for telling me that. Looking closely in the 1998 interview transcript, um, so he does own the white ropes and some alongside red and blue flecks in the same conversational exchange. So we see the confirmation. Like I said, I don't know who that is. But we see the confirmation of the red and white flecks is what this looks like. But we also see the white rope. Oh, he has like little shoes on. And it becomes more plausible and reasonable to believe that wherever he bought this, he could buy this. And the thing about ropes is that, boat ropes in particular, is that they're different. They're kind of different, right? They're a little different. And so we got our binoculars here. Hmm. And we see it could be the case that you do own a white rope, and the rope could belong to you. Even though it's not in the house, it doesn't have to be sourced to the house. It could be from somewhere in Michigan. So the majority of the rope could be in Michigan, and you couldn't be holding rope here to take to Michigan because you have a plane to fly to Michigan. So we see you with white rope, and Patsy confirms that you had white rope. What is to say that some of this rope that was existing in your house was not supposed to be going to Charlevoix the next day? What's to say that? So, to close out this report, trace evidence in the JonBenét Ramsey case presents a complex picture. Judge Carnes' Wolf versus Ramsey decision highlights beaver hair and dark animal hairs on the duct tape in JonBenét's hands, as well as unsourced binding materials, supporting the inference that at least some items were brought into the Ramsey home from outside. At the same time, fiber evidence described by investigators indicates that materials consistent with John and Patsy Ramsey's clothing were found on key items, suggesting a potential link between the family's garments and the crime scene. Modern fashion sources show that beaver fur is used by both men and women, and high quality beaver garments are expensive. Correct. So the presence of beaver hair does not indicate the perpetrator's gender, but does imply contact with a luxury fur item. Ultimately, the hair and fiber evidence alone cannot conclusively determine whether the crime was committed by an intruder or someone outside the home, or someone inside the home. If we're looking just objectively in that way, it does, however, narrow the possibilities by showing that materials from outside the home were involved, and that trace fibers from clothing worn by family members or similar garments were present on key evidence. Comprehensive DNA testing and additional investigative work are needed to clarify these conflicting clues. So there's a lot of information, a lot of material to kind of sift through and continue to sift through. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe. For those of you who are liking, thank you. For those of you who are sharing, thank you. For those of you who are subscribing, those of you who are hyping, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Big hugs. Hope you're well. Hope you're taking care of yourself. And until next time, take it easy.